All right, Jim Pruner from WebBikeWorld. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks for having me. This is a little overwhelming considering the caliber of other people you've had on your podcast.
I don't know, man. First of all, thank you for that, and I want you to introduce yourself. But uh, I was a little intimidated having you on, and I'll just be honest. I think when you read your body of work, and I actually have this in one of the questions. I got to be so careful not to talk too much because I want you to talk. But you wrote an 8,000 word, I don't know, dissertation on Arai helmets. Like, to me, it's like the talent level that it takes to do that. Like, I make videos, right? And I did some blogging in the past, but to compose that is I was just blown away by it. And some of the way you structure things and the way you make people imagine things by how you word it's really impressive. So when I say I was a little intimidated, I'm like, this guy is a writer and an author, I guess, a big time gear nerd. And I got to be careful not to step too far out of my lane or I'm going to get like crushed. So welcome. Yeah. And I kind of set you up, but why don't you introduce yourself, tell people what you do?
Um, 8,000 words is often sort of my average when I hit something I'm really interested in. I mean, I've written over 20,000 word novella about a trip that I took to Tuktoyaktuk when they finished the Dempster Highway in 2018. So it was crashing my editor's computer when he was trying to upload all the hundreds of photos and tons of text that I had put in on it. Um, but I guess that's not really an introduction. My name is Jim Pruner, and I'm from Alberta, Canada. I've been a motorcyclist since I was 12 years old, so I think that's almost 38 years. And obsessed with motorcycles all that time, ever since first day that my dad came home on a Honda CB750 that was, I think, a 76. So it was almost as old as I was. And amazingly, that's kind of what I started riding too, even though I couldn't reach the ground. And about 8 years ago, I answered an ad that said, "Do you like to write about motorcycles?" And obviously, I hadn't up until that point very much, but I fit the profile, and man, things changed in a hurry. Next thing I knew, I was going all over the place, riding bikes, talking to people who were experts in their field, and reading really boring things like the ECE 2205 and 2206 specifications, and trying to dumb it down and make it palatable for regular people. And it's been a lot of fun. I've done things that I never imagined and been places I have always wanted to go, and it's been a fun ride. And I've always wanted to be on a podcast and speak to people who are interested about this stuff. It's hard to find people with my level of obsession.
Yeah. And I'll just let everybody know how we met. Because that's when I knew it was almost like how do I was actually texting Haley last night about this. So Haley is one of the marketing leaders at Revit. And so when we were at the Get On Adventure Fest in South Dakota this year, um, I was sitting in the Revit tent with Haley and you walked in. And I remember you had your suit on, maybe not your top, but you had at least your pants on and you had your pant legs cuffed up and you just asked a couple of innocuous questions about the boots you're wearing, the Revit Adventure GTX or whatever, which I have as well. And so Haley answered your questions, and then you just kind of like leveled up again and again and again. And by like the third back and forth, I was like, "Who is this guy?" Like, just like you're talking about the machine that makes the weave that goes into the TPU. I'm just making it up, but I was just like, "This is incredible." And to her credit, she held her own very well. But it was apparent to me that you knew these boots inside and out, like no pun intended, but everything about them. And you were just inquiring about a very specific thing you want to know the answer to. And that's when I was like, who is this guy? And then, of course, I looked you up. I think you had a card or something. And I looked you up. I was like, oh, that makes total sense. Like he actually writes about this stuff and goes deep in the details. So that was an interesting experience for me.
No, that was really fun. I didn't recognize you, but I had actually started following you on Instagram because I saw those short reels that you made about kind of tongue in cheek talking about the GS and how there were things that didn't really make sense, and then you playfully ignored the obvious discord that goes on in all of our minds when we're so in love with a motorcycle that we ignore something that might seem a little silly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, oh man, and I don't want to go too far on this because we're talking about a story that people weren't there for, but there was a
Yeah,
guy
yeah.
there, and I think you made some sort of offhanded joke about being a land pirate, and I was just rolling because he just had this big beard and like things in his beard. Anyways, I was like, okay, this guy's got a little humor, and I want to get into that because you did write a few things. I have a contrast here of things that you've written that are like spectacular, and then some sort of almost savage humor that you have as well. So I thought that was amazing. But we're going to go off track here, off script a little bit. We're talking about boots because the Revit Expedition GTX, and we've started texting over Instagram and things like that. And I think we're going to hit home here with something that's very personal to people. So I've gone through a number of boots. I think I've sent you pictures. I've looked at your stuff. You reviewed a bunch. What do you think about it when people who ride motorcycles or adventure bikes in general talk about, I want a boot, and then the second thing they say, they ask you as a reviewer, but I really need to be comfortable to walk around in. Where does your mind go when you hear that? Because I hear it all the time.
Uh, I think it's just a natural progression in our journey as motorcyclists. I mean, I can think back to the days when was riding dirt bikes and stuff, and I thought that high top running shoes were excellent protection because it actually went above your ankle, and it just has to do with our level of understanding. And to be brutally honest, I think it's runs in parallel to the severity of crashes we've seen or experienced because being hurt really sucks. And when I hear people say that, I kind of tell them what you're asking is impossible because there's always a compromise. And I think especially if you're riding off road, but really if you're just riding a motorcycle, you need to eventually get to the place where you realize you shouldn't compromise protection for comfort. I try to encourage people, but everyone has to make their own informed decision, and everybody has different risk tolerance levels. And I won't pretend that I'm always at GAT. I'm not always fully decked out, but I try to be, and I believe in being that way. A perfect example that I can think of is recently, I think his name is Moto Giant on YouTube. Anyway, he's a fairly popular content creator, and I was just floored when I read and saw the videos that he was producing after a crash that he had at, I think he said 75 miles an hour. He went down and slid, and his feet both got pinned underneath his Tiger. And he wasn't wearing his boots. His boots were actually on the bike, rolled up, and a sleeping bag or something had gone into the rear wheel, locked it up, and he was totally unprepared, went down. And I think he was wearing running shoes, like just run of the mill. And it actually ground down all of one foot and took a couple of toes off of the other foot. And he had to have his shin amputated about halfway up. And the horror that I could imagine of being, a human crayon smeared down the road, I really can't even fathom the pain and suffering and the life-changing injury that he's just experienced. And I mean, it could have easily been me. I have ridden in improper footwear And it's one of those things I think we forget about a lot is our boots and our gloves. We could have the greatest helmet, the greatest riding gear, and then we cut a corner somewhere.
And that's the time when it happens. I think to stick with boots, because I have the next question set up based on what you were saying. But I hear I want them to be comfortable to walk in. So I have a extreme example of that. My first question is, where are you walking to? Because I've ridden all around. And usually it's like, oh, I'm at this place. I'll walk over here, take some pictures, get back on the bike, or I walk into the gas station to pay for. Like, where are you walking to? But endorsement on those Revit Expedition GTXs. I did that moto training boot camp in Africa, and there was one section towards the end where we had to push motorcycles and all this stuff. But I actually full gear hiked in those things, like up mountain trails. I would say it's probably 2 miles at most. I was like, well, I guess if you had to do this in these boots, they'd be fine. But generally speaking, I'd take the protection over, and I have upped the level of protection. But I want to be comfortable walking around always kind of gets me. I'm like, where are you walking to? Right? Like, I don't know. It's interesting to me.
Are you walking or hiking? Or are you riding or are you hiking today? I think you need to plan that out a little better. Maybe carry another set of boots. They're not that heavy or bulky.
Yeah. Yep. I totally agree. Which you always hear a phrase that says, you get what you pay for, right? So my boots cost $1,000. My boots cost $25. I hope not, right? But you review a ton of gear. People send you helmets and gloves and suits and all the things. Does price point always guarantee? It's a big statement using an absolute there, but does higher price always guarantee better quality?
Well, yeah, this one is a deep well to dive into. I mean, I tend to focus on the expensive gear. Um, because I want to ideally help people make an informed decision before they plunk down such a huge amount of their hard-earned money. That's sort of the main reason I choose the more expensive stuff. And then the second reason is I can better compare that expensive stuff to the more run-of-the-mill, inexpensive, affordable stuff. Do you get what you pay for? Sometimes. And I would lean towards saying yes, if you can fully appreciate all the finer points of the gear, which is sometimes hard to do because when you look at a helmet, you can only see so much, and you can't see the level of protection that you're getting other than looking at the certification stamps on it. Now, does that mean that a DOT only showy doesn't protect as well as a ECE and DOT approved Scorpion? Not necessarily. It's really hard to tell because this is all to do with different philosophies of skinning the same cat. I mean, our goal here is to protect our brain, and there's lots of different philosophies on how to do that. Um, but getting back to your question, I think the up to about say the $500 or $400 mark of a helmet, uh, the protective ability might not necessarily increase that much. And when you look at the actual G's of force measured through impact testing in helmets, there's actually not that much difference between a DOT and an ECE or a Snell. There is a difference, but the materials are only so good. And there are so many variables. Helmet size. Small and medium helmet shells tend to protect better and deflect more energy, absorb more energy than extra large and extra, extra large. And we kind of talked about this with your boots, the Revit boots, and any boots for that matter. I was asking Haley, the Revit rep, is there a correlation with larger boots, say a size 12 or 13, being more flexible and more likely to transmit force and bending through them than like a size 6 or 7? because I was sort of drawing the parallel between the helmets and the boots there. And she said she was going to find out, but I haven't followed up with her yet.
I think from a helmet perspective, what I've always heard or what I've even repeated is, price point. So yes, so you go back to the days when forums are super popular. I mean, all you'd have to do is be like $75 Bell helmet versus $500 whatever, and the thread is, hundreds of replies long. But I guess the normal response would be they do the same thing, big blanket over that as far as protection. But when you have an Arai, well, now you get all the features and it's super comfortable. But as far as protection goes, it's going to protect you the same because they have the same ratings. And after reading your Arai article, I think that that would probably be incorrect. Am I right in assuming that?
I mean, most crashes statistically are at slow speeds. Few of them are at high speeds. And in a low speed crash, you're falling from about, 4 feet and you're hitting the ground. And that's the total force that you take. It gets much worse when you actually, hit something like you T-bone a minivan or something like that. And then you have other things that come into play, like torsional forces that hit the helmet as you smack into something and then it's transmitted inside. And so I think, again, this comes down to different philosophies. Arai is very clear that they prioritize protection first and foremost, and they tend to hit multiple standards. Like they'll pass DOT without even a second glance. They'll pass ECE 2206. They'll pass Snell M2025 is the newest one. They never struggle to pass those standards, uh, but neither do other companies too. Scorpion's got helmets that cost half as much, and they can hit all three as well. But the difference between a Scorpion and an Arai comes down to the level of obsession with perfection. Arais are incredibly overbuilt. Like most helmets are only recommended to run for 5 years. And Arai says that too. But realistically, there are a lot of people running Arais for double that, triple that, and the helmets are still good. Their longevity is unbelievable. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's what you should do. I think you should always follow the manufacturer's recommendation. But on the other hand, all you have to do is handle an Arai helmet, you know, lift the visor and listen to how quietly it hinges. Look at all the little attachments on it, and they're all engineered to break off in an impact so that they're not a stress riser. There are no ridges on the shell. It can't catch on anything. Even the sun peak is engineered to just break right off if it hits in in a crash and an impact. There's so much thought between everything from the materials they use in the shell to the weaves in reinforcing bands to I met a woman who her job in the factory is to apply the rubber seal that goes around the bottom edge of the shell, which is totally unnecessary. It's aesthetic only. And she trains people on the exact correct amount of adhesive to apply to that rubber, because too much and it tends to ripple and it will more easily fall off, and too little it won't stick. And there are people who their only job is to drill holes in the shells. That's what they've done for 20 years, 25 years.
We're kind of there's something that I wrote down here, and this kind of caveats or dovetails on that. When Mr. Rai was talking about that, and he said, and I quote from your article, um, "The helmets they build here in some ways become like their offspring." That's crazy. I mean, is it crazy? It's not crazy, but you're just like, I'm pumping out helmets, but like that just to me showcased like how they view what they do. Like I'm creating offspring that are that's going to go out into the world and be ridden by Phil or Jim or whoever and be polished on the shelf for 10 years. That level of uh, dedication is incredible, I think. And you saw it firsthand, right?
I've always been fascinated with Japan and its culture, and I mean, seeing it with my own eyes was really something. I had never been there before till 2019, and I didn't think I would like Tokyo as much as I did. I, I I readily admit that I don't like being told what to do. I'm a little bit of a strong-handed rebel, and I figured that that society would be very regimented, and there's a lot of unspoken rules about how to interact, and lots of tradition and things that I don't necessarily buy into. But when I got there and I started looking around, and I realized, wow, they have labeled sidewalks here. The bicycles go here, pedestrians going this way in this lane, pedestrians going this way in that lane. They have the stairwells and the subways all labeled. It's uh it's fascinating because when you do just go with the flow, things really are smooth. And this kind of ties into their mindset. And I'm making a generalization, but I think it's a fairly big point to notice is that many people in Japan, they'll select a career, and that's it for life. They're fully devoted to that calling, and it's a lot more than just a way of earning their money. It's tied to their persona, and if they're a sushi chef, they will happily work to make it a little bit better every day for 50 years. And I respect and admire that level of focus and the drive to reach that level of quality.
I read there also in your article that the pursuit is so great, like but the changes are so incremental. So in other words, these helmets are constantly improved, but they'd be almost imperceptible to us just looking at the helmet. But they're constantly making changes and upgrading. I mean, to me, I have an XD4 and XD5 on the shelf behind me, but big difference, right? Big difference in the helmet. Almost a different helmet. It is a different helmet. But I think the constant improvement is something that's what you pay the extra price for. So speaking of price, I want to take this opportunity, and we're going to come back to Arai and come back to Japan. I have questions about Japan, but I just want to say all of us started riding at some point. Me, it was about 25 some years ago, and I didn't have any money and all the things. So, what's your message to those folks that like? I just started riding. I got my first Ninja something. That was my first bike, and I have $200 to put into a helmet. Right? I don't have the $800 or $900. Of course, I want an Arai. I remember thinking that seeing an Arai, can't afford it. I got to go over here. I think I bought like an AGV or something. But what's your expert advice to folks that are on a budget or beginning or they can't afford top of the line everything, helmets or otherwise?
Yeah, it's tough, man. Um, would I rather buy a used Arai or a new AGV or a new Bell? I wouldn't endorse buying used helmets because you don't know how that's been treated. The main thing to watch for with a helmet is the inner layer, the protective foam that is underneath sort of the comfort liner that you don't see until you pull out the comfort liner. That foam is very sensitive. And every time you poke a hole in it or put a dent in it, you are diminishing its ability to absorb forces of impact when you crash. And I cringe when I see people setting it on their mirror, and that pointy mirror is denting into the protective foam. Or I've even seen people with it on their backrest, and it's strapped to the backrest, and they're riding around, and that helmet is vibrating in the foam against the backrest. Like their helmets are mistreated constantly by owners who don't know what they're doing.
I'm a mirror guy. Holy smokes. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, you're better to just hang it by the chin bar on your foot peg It's low to the ground. If it does fall off, it's just going to go plunk, an inch, maybe 2 inches. You're not going to hurt anything. Or there are even little hooks you can buy that you can attach to the bar ends, and you can hang your strap on there.
My tank bag, and actually the bag on the back, it has a little like carabiner. It comes with that. And I looked it up. What's this for? And I was like, oh, so you can hang your helmet on it. And I was like, oh.
Your question is a tough one to answer, but I'm not going to say buy this brand, buy that brand. I'm going to say look for gear that is certified by professionals. The more, the better. And unfortunately, in North America, we don't have sort of the watchdog that Europe has in the ECE. There are ECE regulations and standards, which are decent. I mean, personally, I would like to see them exceed those, but you don't always get that. And at least you've got some level of guarantee that, look, this gear has been tested, it passed, being held against a sanding belt that's spinning at this speed for 8 seconds before it wore through. So avoid non-motorcycle gear. In my youth, I thought any leather jacket was a motorcycle jacket, and it's not. It's not made with longer sleeves. It's not made with stitching put on the inside of the seam so that it can't be worn away in a slide. It's not as thick a leather. It's not armored. It's a whole different ballgame, motorcycle leather jackets versus fashion leather jackets.
You're talking jackets, you're talking armor, man. I could go, this could be a very long podcast, but because my mind constantly spins when you're talking, and I'm like, okay, so I've got him on the spot here. I got to ask him all these questions. So to recap that, find the stuff that's certified, right? Even if you're on a budget, that helps. That helps. I want to ask you a question because I don't have any context other than what I think I heard. But I think Fortniner made a video about armor is useless or something, and then I've heard it repeated a couple times, right? Because okay, I'm wearing this armor, but like if I fall off I don't even know how he described it, but assuming you're falling off at 60 miles an hour, what's it really going to do? What do you? I mean, I've always worn armor. I continue to wear armor. You know, all the stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I I mean, I don't want to slag Ryan.
Yeah, I don't know the guy either. I've heard this through several people. Did you hear what he said? So I'm asking you, the expert.
Yeah, people send me his videos all the time, and they're very entertaining. He's cinematically very cool stuff. And not everything he says I disagree with, but I disagree with a lot of what he says. I agree with him saying airbags are good. Airbag vests are fantastic, and I highly recommend them. But armor has a purpose. I think it's maybe misunderstood, and this is what he was trying to say is useless. Yeah, if you hit something at high speed, your armor doesn't do anything. It's not made to do anything. Airbags are made to help in that scenario. But armor is mainly there to soften sort of the hard points, like your elbow, your shoulder, your back, like your spine. If you fall and you hit like a bumpy terrain, yeah, it can eat up that. Helmet manufacturers are even starting to put a little bit of Rheon and some of the other armors in helmets between the liner and the shell, because they've realized it can add some torsional protection. But yeah, armor mainly is to soften the hard points on our body, that if we go sliding on a hip or sliding on an elbow, shoulder, back, our bones will create pressure riser points, and it will rub right through that small surface area. And once you've punctured the protective clothing, it rips wide open, and then you're going sliding on your own skin. That's why your protection rating or your abrasion resistance rating increases when you use the exact same shell, but you change the armor from level 1 to level 2 on the inside.
for those that have not experienced it, first of all, I don't want anybody to experience it, but sliding down the pavement is something that is incredibly terrifying to me. I think when you see gear that's ready, or even not ready, I watched a guy ride by the other day and he had like tennis shoes and jeans on. I was like, oh man. So my really, I wrecked more than I should, but my real experience with sliding was this is probably over 10 years ago. I was coming out of a carousel turn. I think it was like an endurance race or prep for an endurance race on the track, but I low sided and I was probably doing 70. I don't know, whatever. I slid down the track on my back. And the one thing I instantly thought, I felt my suit getting hot, like instantly. And then, of course, I ragdolled off into the whatever. But I just remember now I look back and I think, what if you were to do that on the street and you're wearing jeans or a hoodie or like what I'm wearing right now? Like I was in full leathers, back protector, everything. I just remember the heat and that's a terrifying thought, right? So to your point, the way jackets are constructed, the way armor is constructed, it's all built for that sort of event, I would think.
So I had a friend who went down wearing a motorcycle leather jacket that wasn't armored, and he landed on his shoulder, and so the whole jacket shifts very quickly. Like I don't know what speed you could measure it in, but it goes from this to this in the blink of an eye. And the friction that's created when your jacket shifts that much, like 2 inches, let's say, he had a burn right here from where that collar had moved. I think it had actually torn the zipper open or something because he didn't have it done all the way up. He had it a little bit open. So, I mean, that's why racers still wear leather. It really does protect the best in a slide. It has the best abrasion resistance, although now AAA is showing up in some Cordura jackets, like Climb's got one. Um, Super fabric definitely helps. I'm a big fan of super fabric. I'd like it to cover every inch of me, but yeah, it's too expensive to do that.
You're talking about leathers and like, obviously when I was sliding, leather fits very tight to your body. It's not going to shift and create those burns. So one of my older suits is a Climb Badlands Pro. I say older, it's probably 4 years old. But it's one of those where when I put the jacket on, I got to like move the elbow around, move the knee around to get it to fit. And so what I'm hearing you say is in a wreck, if I were to wear those, obviously it's better than wearing jeans, but that stuff could shift. And in your experience, is that something that you look at when you review jacket coat? Or is it something like, hey man, just make sure it fits?
I mean, I've seen people wearing things that are so loose, I could almost climb in there with them. And then you see other people who it's so tight they can barely, bend down to reach their bars. Uh, it's a good idea to get a professional to help fit you. A lot of people are running around with improperly fitting helmets too, because they have the wrong head shape for the helmet they've chosen, which is another whole tangent for us to go on. But I'm surprised. I do collect photos of crashed gear, and I look at it carefully, and I go, "Wow!" I'm often surprised at how well the jackets do, and even those protective hoodies that are Kevlar lined. They really surprise me how well they protect in a crash, even when the armor is built in. But personally, I wear my armor strapped to my body. I like it better because I have sort of uh, my body shape is not typical. I have a very short inseam. I have a muscular build. It's very difficult for me to find something that fits right. And so I changed my philosophy a few years ago to wear the armor strapped to my body, and it's always level 2. And I've moved to the Climb airbag, which Ryan Fortnite argues is garbage, and I strongly disagree with that. Um, but yeah, everybody is free to choose. And I was having this discussion online with someone recently, actually, and he was saying, "Well, you just have the wrong gear; it doesn't fit you." And I said, "Well, show me a pair of riding pants that has a 28-inch inseam, and I'll wait." because I've looked and they're not out there. 30 inches is the short sizing. So the pockets for the knee and shin armor is always 2 inches lower than where I need it. And I know I'm not alone.
Right. So there are, there are the solutions out there like Aerostitch comes to mind, custom suit. And I think that what this comes down to, man, is I think what I like what you do and that you educate, right? You're providing things, but I'll go back to myself admitting what I did. Like when I got my GS, I was on a KLR 650. I got the GS. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get the proper adventure gear to go with this. And I just saw, I was like, oh, climb, that's the thing. Oh, Badlands, okay, sure, that's what I'm supposed to wear. And like it's a 36, whatever, it fits. And I would probably assume that most people just do that versus the level of understanding I have now on. Oh, and I had your favorite, the Forma boots, the comfortable to walk around in boots. Because like, well, those say adventure on them, so I should buy those. And when you start to do a little digging, you're like, wow, maybe that wasn't the right thing for me, for what I'm doing.
Ideally, you can find something that does both, because I know uh, having having some gear on you is better than having no gear on you. And I realize in Canada here, it's not an issue because the only people who can ride without a helmet are Sikh people, and it's a religious understanding that is afforded them. But I know in the States, you have several states where you don't have to wear a helmet. And I'm all about giving people the freedom of choice, so long as it's an educated choice. So, I mean, that's why there's obsessive weirdos like me to talk to. Absolutely. I try and learn everything I can and share it with everyone I can to make that informed decision.
Do you ever get tired of that? And what I mean by that is people coming to you and asking you the same questions over and over. I would assume like, hey, I see you at the whatever. Oh, that's Jim. Hey, man, what's the best helmet I could buy? Like, or just very generic, right? Do you get peppered with those questions a lot?
No, yeah, yeah, a lot. And I frustrate some people with my answer of how long do you have to discuss this? I had one reader who was emailing me directly based on an article I wrote and asking that exact question: what gear do I need? And I think three responses went back and forth of me asking more questions because I wanted to know, all right, what application, what size are you, how often do you ride, what's your budget? It all plays important factor in determining what the answer is to that question. But I've sort of learned to dumb it down too. And sort of my go-to is look for the stuff that has multiple certifications. Like if you can buy a helmet that is DOT, ECE, SNEL, FIM, BSA, JIC, buy that helmet and try and find one that's comfortable while you're at it. Because the market is beginning to respond. They're beginning to provide more proof of certification, more proof of testing. But there are some really janky brands out there that mostly come out of China that they might manufacture for another known brand, and then they sort of sell their own knockoff or similar product. And I reviewed one, well, not me, but I got a helmet from a company called Nenki about 5 years ago, and it didn't fit. So that was kind of my first clue that this was not the kind of outfit that I wanted to waste my time with. But because we had never reviewed one of these smaller Chinese helmet manufacturer products, I thought, well, we should do it. So I handed it off to another reviewer who had a little bigger head, fit the helmet, and yeah, the results were predictably bad. In a crash, the helmet, I mean, it probably would work somewhat because it did have the appearance of a regular DOT helmet, It had all the sort of basic stuff, the expanded EPS foam, and it was all there, but I have my doubts.
We're in a weird time where you look at stuff like that, like there's websites, then you're like, wait, that looks like a really nice helmet, but it's $35. Right? Like, how can that be? And I've had some of those folks hit me up as well, like, hey, and I don't know if I could, other than let me try to disprove that this isn't a piece of junk, right? I don't know of any other way to approach it because I just can't see it working the same or being of the same quality, not even close.
But in the end, I want to be able to show people, that helmet won't protect you or it will be inferior protection, but I can't. I don't have a lab to test it. I don't have, like Snell uses, I think, 7 or 8 helmets for every size for their testing. So it's not just one and done. They're going through those same barrage of tests 8 times or more. It might even be more. I might be forgetting, but I remember that it is multiple times for every size. So it's a huge thing to have a helmet properly tested and Snell certified for sure. They're absolutely the strictest. But so that's why I say I like multiple certifications on my helmets. So DOT, remember, is a self-certified certification. So Nenki and those other brands who are selling helmets for $50, brand new on Amazon or whatever, if it's DOT only, all they have to do is just put the sticker on themselves and say this is a DOT approved helmet. And there's a big difference between that helmet and an Arai that is DOT, or an AGV that is DOT, or a Bell that is DOT. A lot of those helmets are never tested because the NHTSA doesn't have time or manpower to test everybody. They should. And I mean, that's what they do in Europe. That's what they do in Japan. That's what they do in the UK. They do force the companies to submit all those helmets for testing to the ECE or, whoever else involved, FIM. And my friend actually asked me recently, because he knows that I review so many different helmets, so many different brands. He said, I think I was talking about this new Vata 7 helmet with the lights integrated in it. And I was, kind of pumped about what a neat innovation this was. And he said to me, I wear a Rye. Is there any reason for me to abandon the brand? And I thought about it and I said, no. If you're happy with Arai, if you're not looking for something lighter, um, because they do tend to be on the heavier side, where many other builders like AGV are building a way lighter helmet. And interestingly enough, I've noticed since I wrote that article that a lot of other brands are scoring very well in independent testing. Arai scores well, but the one that I always look at is Sharp. It's an independent testing facility in the UK. And so they're not motivated by any sort of investment or anything. I think they're propped up by the government financially. So they just provide data to the consumer. Now, the tricky part is they don't review DOT helmets. So they only review ECE helmets. And so there is a difference between the ones we have here, even if it's the same model, like the XD5. It's called the Tour 5 in Europe. And so when you look at the score there, they rated it 4 out of 5 stars. That's really strong. But what I have noticed is that both AGV and Shoei score higher overall. So if you average out all the scores of the helmets, who actually is providing the most protection? Well, again, it's a very difficult question to answer because it depends on the crash, depends on the size of the helmet, depends on the person's physique, depends on crash conditions, yada, yada, yada. But I like to use Sharp as one opinion that I really respect. So am I limiting myself only to Arai now? No. But again, I stick to my guns and say, if I ever crash, I hope I'm wearing an Arai or a Shoei. Those are kind of my two favorite brands.
Right. What was the brand of the helmet? I saw you did a video on it about a year ago. The one with the blinkers in it and the brake light on it.
Yeah, that's the one I was just talking about.
I watched this reel where Elon Musk was talking about, 5 mistakes people make, whatever it is. But he was like, one of them, I think it was step 3, was like, uh, we try to engineer or perfect something that didn't need to exist in the first place. And the same day, I just seen that. And then I saw your review and I was like, do we really need helmets with blinkers in them and brake lights on? And now I interviewed Alex from Brake Free. He has a thing you can slap on the back as a brake light. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you need all this stuff, or should we just focus on I just need a helmet? Do I need or is it innovation? We got to call it innovation, and sometimes we'll fail, but we're going to ultimately go forward. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, it sort of depends on your philosophy. So I've looked at this helmet very, very closely. I've got one of the first production models, and I'm pretty impressed with the helmet, never mind the lights. Like, I would rate the quality of the helmet like an AGV, which is a brand I respect. And so the lights, I've spoken to the CEO, Brian Garvey, about why he put these lights in the helmet. It's not just a novelty thing. So he years ago was driving in LA, I think it was, and it was dark. Couldn't see much on the freeway, and he could see some faint lights flashing on the inside lane of the road. And it turned out to be a motorcyclist had gone down, knocked themselves out, and they were lying not far from the bike in the middle of the road, dressed completely in black, out cold. And he pulled over right away and, got them off the road, tried to help, but it really stuck with him. Wow, I could not see this person. I could have run over them so easily. And so the application is clear at night why we would want that or need that. In the daytime, it's debatable, but I can tell you when I wear that, it's made by Vata 7 and it's called the X1. Now, the turn signal lights aren't that visible in daylight, but the brake light is pretty good. Like, even in bright sunshine, it's noticeable. My friend who I ride with the most was behind me when I was first testing the helmet, and for whatever reason, the when I have the transmitter hooked up to my GS, it causes the brake light to pulse every few seconds, even when I'm not hitting the brakes. The light is tied to your brake lever, so that when you hit the brakes on the bike, the light on the back of the helmet lights up. And so it's actually the CAN bus electrical system that sends low voltage through the circuit every few seconds to make sure that the tail lights are still intact, and it will throw a fault code if it's not. And the helmet is picking up on that. So it's actually registering that voltage. And my buddy Greg said, "Hey, your helmet is flashing." And so that told me that brake light is noticeable out on the road, which sort of flies in the face of a report that I think just recently came out in Australia, where they were they were arguing that high visibility measures on riding gear is pointless, which immediately draws my ire. Because as a motorcyclist, I want to be visible. We all want to be visible as much as possible, not for attention, but for safety. So, in my mind, I disagree with their findings, but I don't have anything but empirical evidence to argue to the contrary. I know for me, when I'm riding with people at night and they have reflective striping on their helmet or their gear, it blows up as soon as my bike lights touch it. And I sure notice them. And even in daylight, like go to any construction site and you see the stripes, you see the fluorescent yellow and red. Um, I don't know. I, I don't like to argue with scientists, but I will say that I have a healthy amount of doubt about some of the results of their findings.
What would you say is the best for visibility? Best color helmet to buy? Probably not black. We're not talking about the coolest look. What would you say the best color helmet is? Because I've heard arguments for white. I've heard fluorescent. You see the fluorescent colors. What would you think?
I I couldn't say, man. I mean, it depends on the audience, right? And you could be in neon pink from head to toe, and some people will never see you because they're just dangerous, inattentive drivers. And anybody who's been riding any amount of time knows that what my dad taught me as a kid is still true to this day. You ride like you're invisible, and on the off chance that someone does see you, they want to hit you. And that's the only way to survive as a motorcyclist.
I'd be remiss without mentioning some of your work here. And so I want to do that, and I want to read you back just a couple things that you've written because I want people to know. Well, when I read this, I was like, "Wow, that's really good." And then I read the other one, and I was like, "That's pretty good too." So on your ride up north, I think you were describing Highway 37, and you said the road is like a scar running through a thick canopy of near jungle proportions of poplar and pine trees. And I was like, man, that's some like pretty compelling, like the way you described it, right? And then I want to contrast that with what you wrote here, and this is in your Arai article. So you go from beautiful, just I can imagine myself riding on that road with canopy flowing over me. And then you wrote here, you're like, you said, well, I guess if you have TBI, you won't be allowed to worry about it, or at best, to be more concerned about what color of crayon you like to eat at the time, rather than considering whether your brain damage was avoidable. That was hilarious. It was funny, and you were making a point. But I guess to me, that showcased like the spectrum of what you can do, right? You can just, take me through your trip through words, or you can be very sort of harsh. Not harsh is the wrong word. Very sort of blunt to the point of like, hey, if you're going down this route, that's fine, but understand this is gonna where you're gonna arrive at, and maybe you're gonna be eating crayons.
Well, I appreciate the compliment, man. I put way too much effort into these reviews. That's what I've realized over the years is it is a monumental amount of effort and time. I think if I put a number on it, it would be shocking. But it's exhausting. But I do it because I'm interested and I'm excited about what I learn. And most of all, I just want to help other people catch the excitement that I have and to hopefully make their riding better because it's so good when the ride is just right, time stops and you forget about all your problems. You enjoy life to its fullest. And even if you're, down on your luck, even if you're in the midst of some horrible life circumstances that seem like they're never going to end, they're never going to resolve, there's always the bike.
I agree. I mean, that's so well stated. Two things you said. The reviews are exhausting, and I know I used to feel this way. Like, what would be cool if people sent me free stuff and I could write a review about it. And then what happens is you get stuff and like I have a bag sitting over there. And I remember 2 nights ago, I just stared at it and I was just writing what I thought about it, just like taking notes. Okay, this looks cool. But the idea of doing that, and then you have 4 or 5 things I'm sure you know stacked up, and you're like, "Oh, I still got these boots to do, and I still got this thing, but I don't wanna rush it because I want it to be good." So, I can only imagine your monumental effort that you put in, because you're not just shooting a cell phone video in your garage, right? You're composing all these articles, and you've got pictures and data and details, and so an incredible, incredible effort. And the second part that you mentioned is you're right. When the ride is right, man, all the other things just kind of fade off, and that's what you remember. That's what you focus on, right? And I think that's so important to gravitate back to that. Is ultimately reviews and videos and all the things we do comes back to that thing we first did, which was throw a leg over a motorcycle. And it's like, ooh, I kind of like this. I kind of want to continue to do this. I think that's what's so important.
Yeah, I hear you, man. It gets frustrating sometimes too, um, where I'll invest some time and energy into something, and then I find out like this is the Shoei Neotech 3 helmet I've really fallen in love with, and they sent me a Japanese model. So it's not even DOT, which is fine in Canada. We don't necessarily have to have a DOT helmet as long as it's some other standard. So it's JIC, and fits me beautifully. But I'm still waiting for the DOT model to come to finish that review, and we just haven't seemed to manage to do that yet. This is the GT Air 3 from Shoei, which I did get, and it's too small. And so I can get it on my head, but I can't ride for more than a half hour without feeling like my head is being crushed. Because again, it's the wrong head shape to start with. Shoei typically are much narrower, and I have a wide, round head. Um, so yeah, I've kind of stalled out on those ones, waiting. I mean, I could go with what I have, but it sort of taints the review when I say I couldn't get a comfortable fit.
When you set out to do a review, and I'm going to ask you a broad question, what makes a great review? And I don't think it has to do personally. I mean, you could have a great review that's 1 page, you could have one that's 10 pages. Like, so in your mind, when you're setting out to do a review of that helmet or any piece of gear and you want to put out your best work, what is that goal you're trying to achieve?
It's a moving target, honestly. Um, so I mean, the obvious thing is to be honest with your findings, to be fair with your findings, and when I write them for me. So back before I used to review stuff, I was a consumer who studied as much as I could about every product that I ever bought. Especially if it was a major purchase, I want to know, all right, what am I getting into? And so that's the way I approach it, is very detailed. I I would rather skip a section if I'm not interested in, I don't know, how noisy the helmet is. If Jim starts prattling on about, this helmet is very quiet, or this helmet has a low pitched boom at highway speed, if I don't care because I wear earplugs, I just go, yep, skip down to the safety certification section. But I'd rather have it and not want it than not have it and need it. Um, so yeah, mine are always way too detailed, and I don't apologize for that, because that's the review I think is lacking a lot these days. People think that when I do a social media post about a 200-mile ride I did in the GTR 3, that's my review. It's not. That's just me sharing, here are some preliminary findings after this amount of time with this product, subject to change because it has changed on me before. Um, this one The Climb Krios Pro. I reviewed it in 2019, and at first I was kind of upset with it because I rode down a very dusty road with some friends, and that really fine powder dust got into the vents and the hinges on the visor and froze them. So I couldn't even close the vent anymore. And out on the trail, I was like in danger of breaking the tab right off. So I started like spraying WD-40 in there, cleaner, water, and eventually I freed it up enough to move it. But I thought, wow, that's terrible. And so I did actually a 3 helmet comparison article because everything is relative. And that's again another aspect that I focus on in a review. I could say the GTR 3 is really quiet helmet, but compared to what? What is my baseline? If you have never worn a GTR 3, does that have any value to you? For me, just to say, oh, this is the quietest helmet I've ever worn. Well, what helmets have you worn? So it's important to state relative to what in the review to clarify it. And I try to even use multiple sources. And that's why I love the multi product review best. Those are my favorite reviews is the showdown. So kind of like you, I've sort of been collecting the boots and I refer back to them in the further reviews to say, this performed well in this area compared to this one. In the 3 helmet showdown, I think I rated the Kraus Pro behind the Shoei Hornet X2 and the Arai XD4 in off-road because of those vent issues. Well, turns out after I think another few hundred, it never did happen to me again, is my point. Regardless of where I rode the helmet, I like moved enough material, the dust turned into like a lapping compound within the joint. And now the Krios Pro is actually my most worn off-road helmet. And it's funny because at the end of the showdown, that helmet and the Shoei scored highest. They were tied because I was assigning like 3 points for the best in the category, 2 for second place, and 1 for last. And at the end of it all, I tallied the points and I went, that is weird because at this point in time, I would much rather wear my XD4. And at the time, that was true. But after a while, the XD4 didn't have the transitions visor, the auto tinting visor. And I got caught out at night one time, and it was very uncomfortable riding home with goggles as opposed to, the windshield down or the visor down at highway speed. And so I learned maybe I better wear the Climb a little bit more because it has that auto tinting visor. And like I said, now years later, it's like I wouldn't even hesitate to grab the Climb over the XD4, but the XD5 is a different matter. Like you said, it's much improved over the XD4, which is saying a lot because the 4 is a good helmet. So things change, and I admit that sometimes I get it wrong.
So, we've got man, we got over an hour in the books. It goes fast. I guess what do you got lined up? What are you excited about that you got lined up that that people know or maybe not know about that that you have in the test loop or that you're about to release or that you have in the future for next season?
I've got both those Shoei helmets that I'm trying to finish the review, and I'm hoping to get back to Japan next year. This time it'll be the Shoei factory, and I'm planning to write. So that article I wrote about Arai is the helmet to buy was supposed to be a series. So I had a visit to Shoei lined up for 2020 in April. And I think we all remember what happened in April 2020. Everything shut down and I couldn't go. So it's unfinished business. I was really excited to go to Arai, go to Shoei, and I had uh, something going on with Schubert that I was going to try and go there too and tour their factory, write about it. Maybe a little too ambitious, but I'm going to keep trying.
What is the worst piece of gear you've ever reviewed? Like hands down in your mind, like this thing is just a piece of whatever. Like, what is it? What comes to mind?
Oh, wow. I tend to block them out. And if I get something that's really disappointing, I generally will go back to the manufacturer and say, look, this just is not cutting it. Like, I don't think you really want me to review this officially until you make the following changes. Um, I did, I hate to dump on a brand, but there were a pair of boots that I reviewed years ago that they were made by Joe Rocket Canada. And I think it's, it was pegged as an adventure boot. And I mean, kind of like what you're talking about with those Formas. And I'm not saying all Forma boots are like this. They do have some that are a much higher level of protection. But these Joe Rocket Canada ones, they just flexed really bad. They were extremely hot, like they didn't breathe. They they offered little in the way of protection was my main beef, and the waterproof liner was very low in the boot, so you couldn't really walk in any puddles. It was borderline that even if you wear your pants over the boot, that water wouldn't climb in and get your feet wet. And the antimicrobial quality that's so important when you're multiple days off road and you haven't had a shower, yeah, they were just funky, so funky after like only a few days. And I ended up deciding that they would be a better winter boot than motorcycle boot. And I was still like, I still published the review, and I think I rated them mid threes out of five because I mean, they're still a boot. They still have some protective quality, just not nearly enough for my standards. But on the other hand, like, I think you probably have seen that reel where the guy is on the dirt bike on a trail. He's wearing legit motocross boots, and as he passes a down tree, there's a branch sticking out, and he catches it right in the foot, and it punches straight through the thick TPU that is on the motocross boots and is embedded in his foot. And he pulls over and he goes, "Whoa! Who would ever have expected that to happen?" I'm wearing. They were probably like, I don't know. I didn't make out what boots they were. They could have been Alpine Stars, like the high end motocross. They could have been CD. I don't remember. But they looked like a really solid boot. And, under in the perfect storm scenario, nothing is guaranteed.
Totally agree with that. Totally agree. Although circling all the way back to boots in the original part of our conversation, I mean, those GTX expeditions, I mean, those are a pretty stiff boot, not like motocross, and I still broke my ankle in them. And the way I come back to that is I say, well, given how I crashed, I think, yes, I broke my ankle, but it could have been so much worse. So that's how I look at it. So no gear is a 100%, I think, and all circumstances depend, right?
Well, and they were still stiff enough too for you to be able to ride out of there. The first time I went to the Sturgis rally, the Get On Adventure Fest one, I rode with a guy, and the very first day we were out on a trail, we climbed a rocky hill. He went down, the bike fell on him, and he broke his ankle right then and there. And he was wearing like some, oh man, they're climb boots, but they're like the low cut, soft sided boot so that you can walk comfortably. And he was fairly new to the adventure riding game. And man, he learned a lot that day. There was no way he was walking out or riding out. He couldn't even stand. And we ended up having to get rescued by the local fire department, and the rangers were, I can't even remember, like, I was so impressed with the emergency services around Rapid City. Unbelievable how many, the army of people that showed up to cart this injured rider out of there just blew my mind.
And it's a trade-off. Ultimately, as we continue to reiterate this, like, so the last when I got my bike stuck out there and blew out the clutch a couple weeks ago, I was in the Liat 5.5 Enduros. So I was like, oh, I'm going to look a little more, try these boots, a little more protection. And they are. I mean, they feel like almost like a ski boot kind of situation. But I had to stomp around in the mud and drag that bike out for 2 hours. And I was like, man, I kind of wish I had those Revit boots on it, because there was a lot of off bike stuff in the mud. And I'm wearing these very, plastic, that's the right word, but very stiff boot. So I was just like, man, I can't win from losing out here. Just, I don't know if there is any perfect scenario for a perfect boot.
Yeah, show me anything perfect and I'll show you a liar.
Yes. I will. I'll tell you this. I'm doing some product videos for a company, and when I was talking to them, they're like, "We never, ever use the word perfect," and I was like, "That's great."
I don't even like the word best, but I find myself using it. Like I'll do a Google search, and the first thing that comes into my head is best whatever, best dishwasher. And it's disingenuous because it's all relative to that time period. The week after, something better might have come out. And yet there are other things that really do stand the test of time. So yeah, I try to become more specific about what I'm talking about, like most protective boot, or most comfortable boot, or waterproof boot, or let's be more specific with our language rather than best. It's too subjective.
I agree. I'm just writing the word best down and putting a little X next to it. I think I might be guilty of that. I also think, or I like what you said when you're like, this boot is the whatever relative to. So in other words, I like this boot because, but also I've only worn these other four. So you kind of let folks know, because if I tell you, and we're going down a path I know, but the this is the best helmet I've ever worn, and it's the best, and it's a $200 AGV, whatever. But I've never worn an XD5. Well, let me introduce you to the XD5, right? So yeah, I think that's super important. We're doing this podcast, but when you say stuff, I'm like writing it down. Like, oh yeah, I got to remember to do that.
The word I like to substitute for best is favorite, because that's more honest. I can say my favorite helmet right now on road is the Neotech 3. And here are the reasons why. My favorite dual sport helmet right now was the Cryos Pro. The XD5 is a serious challenger, but this is all subject to change, and there's a sliding scale as technology improves, as the manufacturers step up, as somebody new comes on the scene, somebody does something revolutionary. Like the Cryos Pro has a special protective liner in it called Koroyd. And it was the boys at Climb who introduced me to this in 2019. I'd never heard of Koroyd. It looks like um, honeycomb made out of kryptonite, like bright green honeycomb. Anyway, the claims originally were that it was able to absorb 37% more G forces in a crash. And I went, well, if that's true, then this is going to revolutionize the industry. Never happened. So what's the story with Koroyd? I've been trying to figure it out for years, and I've been looking for independent impact testers like Sharp, but Sharp has never tested the Cryos Pro. But there was a French company called Certimove, and they did, and they actually published the numbers of the G's measured, and they were no different than any other helmet with EPS in it. So Mr. Arai was right. When I asked him about Koroyd, he said he wasn't familiar with it. But he said that, look, we've experimented with lots of different options for the protective foam liner. And until technology advances beyond multi-density EPS foam, this is the best we can find. And Shoei uses the same thing.
I was wearing a Troy Bayliss Edition Swami. It's like 2005-ish when I crashed in mid-Ohio and like caved in. I mean, just like somebody scooped out the helmet. I don't remember the wreck. I woke up in the ambulance, but I still wish I had that helmet. But I just remember saying like, this saved my life. Like, saved my, undoubtedly. We can go talk about helmets all day. And I love what Mr. Arai said, like, this is proven, and this is what we're going to use. And when you've really had a bad wreck or bad impact in a helmet, I think you're just like, I got to put the best thing I can on my dome piece, right? Because otherwise it's just gambling, and there's a million different scenarios. And if, you could have a whatever and you fall over at 5 miles an hour and you're like, I was fine. But what if you're not, right? So I don't know, man. This is a deep topic. I think, I do like the idea that you have an option to choose, but personally, I'm going to put probably an Arai on my head.
I can't argue with that decision because it's, maybe it doesn't score quite as high as Shoei and AGV with Sharp, but that's their testing criteria, which is different. They tend to favor ECE helmets and FIM helmets, and Arai builds their helmets to their own particular standard, which is higher than those ones, the way they look at it. And their criteria is different in how they test whether they've hit their own levels. Yeah, it's so complicated, man. Hard shell versus soft shell versus heavy versus lightweight. There's many experts and many educated people who would tell you one is better than the other. My opinion is if we can hit all of them, that's the best one still, because I have the most experts endorsing that helmet. They can maybe not arrive on a consensus enough to have just one standard worldwide, but the overlap is what I'm interested in. Give me that gear.
I like the fact that you have a rack of all these different helmets, and you're not like, I'm only going to wear just this one thing because we know it's great, but you're like, well, maybe why don't you try this version or this brand, and this brand's good because of X or Y, or but you're coming at them with, well, maybe this Neotech is a good helmet for you because of your favorite, maybe not the best, right?
Right now, it's the helmet I would reach for if I'm going to stay on pavement. Yeah, and I know I used to say I don't favor modular helmets over full face because you could potentially crash with the chin bar up. The chin bar could not be fully latched, and 37% of impacts land in this area. I've seen reasons to favor full face. Ultimately, I think if I'm in a crash, I would rather be in a full face. So I suppose I'm calling myself out on this one. And one of my readers did recently too, when I was talking about the Neotech 3 and saying I favor it over the GTR 3 so far with my limited testing I've been able to do with the GTR 3. And he said, wait a minute, what about if you crashed and the chin bar fails? And I said, well, Sharp tested the Neotech 3 and the chin bar latches remained closed in 93% of the impacts. You can see this number on their site. It's awesome. And I said, I'm comfortable with that and the amount of safety certifications the helmet has to say, I ride with it latched. I've watched the latches each time, made sure that it is closing and latching properly. This one, this is the Scorpion AT960. That one I did have trouble with the latches. The dirt and dust got into it, and one of the latches remained closed, and I didn't notice. And I slammed it down, thought it was locked, and I can't remember what happened. I think I like went to open a vent or something, and touching the helmet, I saw one side move, and it clued me in. Hmm. Maybe if I'm riding off road, I don't want a modular, just in case that happens.
How many times I'm going to tell myself a little bit. I've done this probably in the last couple of years, even. I would say probably I've done this less than 5 times in my motorcycling career. But how many times have you been riding, or maybe you've never done this, and you reach up and you realize you forgot to strap your helmet, and you're like, "Whoa, wait a minute, I've done it," and it's like the most like I got to pull over right now. Uh, I think you just get distracted. I don't know. Maybe you're talking to somebody. It's yeah. So I'm telling myself a little bit on that. I don't know if you've ever done that or not.
So, absolutely, man. Everybody has, and they say they haven't, they're lying. And I've had a lot of people um, condemn the micrometric straps, like latches on the chin strap.
Yeah, the showy the Mary
Yeah,
has. It's
yeah.
yeah.
Shoei loves them. Most European builders love them. Arai won't have anything to do with them. And then there are other ones too that are fidlock style, which is like a magnetic clasp like this. I don't know if you've seen them, but yeah, they're really neat because you just hold them close together and it goes. Um, anyway, I don't think anyone would debate that the double D rings are the strongest, but the point of failure is so high on them. I think it's like 500 pounds. No, it's even more than that. Closer to 1,000 pounds of pressure before double D rings will break. Um, if I have that kind of force on my neck, I would hope the helmet would let go. and so it's the micrometric and fidlocks that they break at about 500 or 600 pounds. And I'm still thinking, if there was that much tension on that clasp, I'm hoping it lets go. Otherwise, I'm going to have a broken neck anyway.
Yeah, and you said something there that I want to key on. What's interesting, let me back up, is that 30 minutes ago, we're like, all right, we're going to wrap this up. No, but I think you and I over a couple of beers somewhere would just go on and on and on. But you said something about being comfortable. I think you cited a stat, 93% something. I'm comfortable with that related to a chin bar. And all this stuff, I think, boils down to that too. Like, what level of risk are you comfortable with? Because I could have the best of everything, airbags and all that, and yet I'm still doing 70 miles an hour through a 30-mile-an-hour turn, right? So the gear is one thing, but like when you toss a leg over a motorcycle, you're accepting risk. The type of riding you do, you accept risk. And the gear is just, I think, one part of it. This is coming to me as I'm saying it, but it's one part of it. So yeah, we want to have the best, I think, that you can afford or that you've tested or your favorite. But also the stuff we do is inherently risky anyways, outside of the armor that we're wearing.
Yeah. I mean, life in general is pretty darn risky, and none of us is getting out of it alive anyway. So there is always an element of risk in everything we do.
but the risk allows you to experience the highs back to if you're going through something in life or whatever it is, man, you're out there on a bike and it's dangerous, right? And dangerous is relative, right? But it allows you to experience that feeling, that euphoria, or that just that peaceful, that calm. I've had some really tough times on a motorcycle, and by tough I mean like I was going through something or whatever, and you're just out there and you're riding, and all the things are going through your mind, but you're still riding. You're like, man, this is it. This is it. This is it. Um, so there's something healing to that. There's something incredibly joyful to that. There's something when you're going through the elements and you're freezing cold. You know, the more it sucks, the better the story. That you just can't experience inside of a cage, and I think that that's part of why we do it, right?
It's definitely the reason we do it. I think we're living fully when I hate to say this because it'll make me sound like an adrenaline junkie, but somebody said recently, it's only when you actually are in a situation where the most serious consequence is death or serious injury, where you fully begin to appreciate the life you have, and it's coming through the really uncomfortable, really challenging moments where you grow. It's always outside of your comfort zone where you grow. If you're always comfortable, there's no risk, there's no reward, or it's very low. It's not a life I want to live.
Yep, I agree totally. That record I referred to back in like the mid 2000s, I remember talking to a guy after, and he was like, "What are you doing?" And this was on the track, and I remember him saying these specific words. He's like, "Look, man, my goal is just to get through life as safe as possible." And great, but I just was like, I don't know if that's my okay. To your point, we're to arrive at what, right? Right. So, and to have experienced or not experienced what?
I mean, I don't think either of us are Travis Pastrana level, but um, you got to have something. You got to have something in your life that makes you nervous, maybe not scared, but nervous.
Absolutely. 100%. I can pound the table on that. Nervous. And yeah, scared a little bit, nervous. I think of some of the sports I do, like you dropping in on a really steep run on a snowboard. I mean, I'm nervous. Or I have a hill climb when I was in Africa, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I remember foolishly thinking, well, maybe I can do it and I won't fall. Like 10 falls later, but you're nervous and you're like, I don't know if I can make it. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And I think that's good to feel versus the predictable, very sort of mellow. I never experienced those highs or those lows. So that's a special feeling. And I think I know a motorcycle gives that to you. Like 100%. Reading your ride, which you did on a Ninja. It was a Ninja. Crazy going to Alaska. It was like, man, that's it. I had to imagine like just standing there and seeing it, and you're taking a picture of it, and you're like, I guess I should take a picture of it, but the picture, whatever, right? Versus seeing it.
Doesn't do it justice, man. But that is one of my claims to fame is that I'm positive I'm the only person to ever take Kawasaki H2 SX up the Alaska Highway all the way to Dawson City. And I actually stopped at a Kawasaki dealer in Whitehorse, and I just needed some chain lube, so I parked the bike out front. And if you've ever been on the Alaska Highway in the summer, you know that what they do is they strip the whole road right down to the dirt. So effectively, the Alaska Highway in stretches in the summer is a dirt road. And I'm riding a 200 horsepower supercharged Ninja on this stuff. I never expected that. The bike did phenomenally well, but it was so filthy by the time I pulled into this dealership. And I went in the door and I was looking around at chain lube, and I turned around to ask a question, and there was not a soul in the store, in the dealership. Everybody was out front looking at who is this lunatic that rode an H2 up here? And I said, well, I did it all for the story.
I look at the tires in the picture. I'm like, these are like something you'd want to go canyon carving on. These are not.
They were the stock, what do they call them again? Batlax, the stock Batlax tires. And I pushed the limits of good judgment on that one, but it sure was a fun story. I'm the only person to ever take an H2 on the Dempster Highway as well. I'm sure of that. But I didn't go the whole way. That would have been insane. But it just went up until I felt I had been on it enough to say that I had ridden on the Dempster, and then I turned around and went back, and I switched to an Africa Twin for the actual ride up to Tuktoyaktuk.
Yeah, the that land is firmly claimed by adventure bikes, I would say. So yeah, to haven't taken that bike up there is wild.
Well, I have my friend Greg took a Harley Crossbones up there. Yeah, it's like he took it there because it was this bike with the biggest gas tank, so the biggest range. And that was his reasoning on street tires. But I mean, he's a former national champion riding sport bikes, and he's an extremely talented pilot, like on two wheels. He's not normal. I wouldn't recommend that at all. I, I just wouldn't.
It almost becomes the challenge. Like, what sort of non-traditional motorcycle can you take, right? Because you're not taking a DR, GS, all the things. Like
Everything is an adventure bike if you're stubborn enough.
Tim, who runs Donkey Sunrise down in Columbia, and he told me a story about how he was riding around Columbia on his 250, and he thought he was doing a great job. And then he saw somebody that was like, there was a couple doing like the entire South American thing on a 50cc scooter, like on these trails. And he was like, wow, I mean, anything's an adventure bike if you make it so.
Oh, I admit to being a prima donna. If I don't have, aggressive knobby tires on my bike when I get to the nasty stuff, I feel motivated to turn around. And that's just my sense of self-preservation kicking in, because I plan to ride until I really just can't physically anymore. And it's sad to think that I've got fewer years in front of me left to ride than I do behind me, but it's true. And some of my friends are getting to the point now where they're, getting into their mid 60s, and they're starting to think, wow, I might only have 10 years. We never really think about it. In your youth, you think, well, this is forever. And I know people who have ridden into their 80s, and even I saw a reel with a guy who was 100 or something, or 90 the other day, where he's still riding. But I think these people are exceptions to the rule, and most of us are more mortal.
Yeah, man, I think about that. I don't say all the time, but quite a bit. Um, how old are you, by the way?
49.
49. So I'm 47. I think statistically speaking, I use that word loosely because I looked it up. On the average, guys like you and me, our life is somewhere like 66% over, something like that. Two-thirds. And so you're like, okay, but of that, how much riding do I have left? How much good times do I have left? How much? And man, you start mulling over that. And you can do a couple things. You can, or you can be like, well, what can I do today? What can I do tomorrow? What can I do? I think about my really good riding, but I've been riding him for over 20 years. Eric, he's in some of my older videos, but he's 20 something years older than me. So when I started riding with him, I was in my mid 20s and he was my age now. And now he's in his mid 60s and he's like, I don't know how much riding I got left. I'm like, dude, you got old. Like, how did that happen? But I've known him the whole time. But I'm like, well, as fast as that happened, now I'm, fast forward, I'm going to be him. So you can go down this long path. And I think all we can do is control the moment we're in and say, yeah, I'm going to take my whatever out. I'm going to go ride it. And I'm going to go get that. I've been texting a little bit about dirt bike. I'm going to go get that dirt bike because I think I want a dirt bike. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that because yes, it's coming. It's coming no matter what you. There's nothing you can do to stop it. So you just got to go out and get after it. I mean, it's a really loose way to say it, but I think it's just the only option we have, right?
Yeah, and it's a different thing for everybody too. I mean, you may well ride into your 80s, and I may stop at 70 because I just, my own father is a great example. He's my mentor, taught me how to ride, and his plan was always to delay his gratification when it came to riding. He didn't do any big trips. He didn't do any extravagant purchases when I was young. And even after I was an adult and out of the house, there was never a new bike in his driveway or anything like that. Uh, and by the time he was about my age now, he was getting ready to retire, and his health was already starting to fail in some, significant ways. And he always talked about, when I retire, I'm going to ride across Canada, or I'm going to ride around North America, whatever it was. And it never happened because by the time he was, I want to say about 50, he didn't have the balance anymore. He didn't have the vision anymore. He didn't have the confidence anymore, most importantly. I mean, there's people out there riding with one arm and one leg and half blind and, you know, everything else. And then there's people like him who said, you know what, it's more important for me to meet my grandchildren someday, or more important for me to live as long as I can. I'll figure out something else to entertain myself that, suits my current physical state. And it was very tough for him. He did break that rule once when I bought my first Harley. Uh, he he came flying over because I think he had always dreamt of owning one, and he took it for a ride. And I hadn't seen him ride for mm, close to 10 years, and I was a little worried actually. And then you remember what you're doing here, and it was like he never had stopped. And I said, "Well, Dad, I mean, you didn't have any trouble, right?" He said, "No, I had a great ride." And then, well, why are you still not riding? But it was just his choice, and in his wisdom, that's the way he went. And we all have to make that same call.
Yeah, I'm first of all, I think that had to be a thrilling ride for him. Was that his last one?
It's the last one I know of. Yeah.
I bet he absorbed every moment of that in the way you told that story. Yeah, I think, man, there's so many choices we have to make. I actually did a talk with my brother, who's 15 years younger than me, and at the time he just had a baby, and I was like, you're a motorcyclist. How do you reconcile that? All the things. And he basically kind of just said what you said, like, I do the best I can to stay safe, but at the end of the day, I got to make decisions, that I'm comfortable with. And what decisions are you comfortable with? Because, yeah, my parents come to mind too. They were over here, I don't know, 6 months ago, and so their whole thing is they're in their 70s and they want to get a camper, right? Want to get a camper, and we're looking at campers online, this and this, and I'm like, so what's stopping you guys from getting a camper? And my dad's like, just got some things to line up and this, and I'm like, what things are you waiting on to line up, right? Like, at what point, you've been talking about this for a while now, and this is all in my mind, but I'm just like, what everybody always thinks, and I say always because we do. We think we'll have no time. I read a quote once says something like, "We stupid humans think we'll live forever." You always think there's more time. There's always going to be the next thing. I'm waiting on this thing to line up, and I don't know. Of course, there's the opposite of that. Just throw stuff against the wall, see what sticks, spend all the money, and there's that way to live too. Um, but yeah, I'm with you, man. I think you just got to go, and you got to. And when I broke my leg, you just kind of sit back, like, man, I didn't think that would happen. That sucks. Um, because you're like, well, what if the next thing happens? What next time you throw a leg over a bike? What thoughts start going through your mind. What if it's something else? And then you just got to go for it, and you just got to put all that aside. So many things could happen, but I choose to do this activity.
You're delusional if you tell yourself it will never happen to you. Um, but if you're comfortable uh, accepting the consequence, I think the risk versus reward is individual. I've tried for years to figure out what the common thread is with motorcyclists, and I can't see it yet because we come from all walks of life, all different backgrounds of status and privilege and class, and it's you could be from an entirely different country, entirely different culture, but you're still a motorcyclist just like anyone over here. If you ever figure out what the actual common thread is, whether it's genetic or it's you just enjoy wind in your face, I don't know what it is because they're so variable. You'll get people who ride 20,000 miles a year inside of 4 months, and you'll get people who put, 1,000 miles on a year if they're lucky and they live somewhere where they could ride all year. There's no common thread that I can find, but it's really interesting to talk to motorcyclists from varied backgrounds and see what makes them tick.
You got me thinking on that because, like you said, we could go out and you meet somebody at an overlook, and you're like, "Hey, you want to ride this next section together?" You don't even know. I mean, there's just that thing that exists, and then you start having conversations, and you can pick up on that. Versus like you go to a networking event at whatever, right? It's some of it can just be like a grind, and you're forcing yourself. But you see somebody out on the trail or on a road, it's just a natural thing that happens. I don't care if you're a group of guys. This happened to me 2 years ago. We were stuck in the San Juan Mountains out here, uh, and there was a roadblock, and so I ended up talking to like 4 guys on Harleys. Like I'm not saying I'm a huge fan of those bikes, but we were just sitting there talking, and it was this natural, free flowing conversation, and it was just something that was there, right? And I don't know if I had that figured out. If I do, I'll let you know. There's a
What?
classic. I
What?
want to say freedom and all the things. I don't know, man. It's beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I even will go one better, where I've ridden in groups of people who I don't know well at the start of the trip, and it'll run like 2 weeks that we're together, we're camping together, we're eating together, we're riding together, we're connected by the cardos or whatever we're using, and there's a constant chatter, and it will range from every topic and back again. And by the end of the journey, you realize, wow, I don't have anything in common with some of these guys other than the fact we both like to ride motorcycles. And at the end of that trip, you'll have a bond, a bond that I can only compare to, like, playing on sports teams or some other very tight knit group. And even though you see this person, you go, hey, how you doing? Oh, you know I don't know, I'm interested in basket weaving, and that's what I've been doing the last 2 weeks. And you go, well, it's nice. I've been on the bike. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then that connection is back, and it's magic. It's something I can't put my finger on, but it's real.
I know it has something to do with the choice to accept risk, like we talked about, um, which elevates you above the status quo. So choice to accept risk, and even then, it doesn't even have to. I don't think it involves like how good of a rider are you, because I experienced the same thing you experienced in Africa with guys, and some of the riders weren't that great. I mean, I was mid pack at best, but it didn't matter. Um, I think it was just the fact that we're all out here on these machines doing things that are risky, dangerous. We're also having extreme amount of fun, and we're sharing that together. And all the breakdowns or the falls or the views or the just pull, the freedom of it, whatever it is, the two wheels. It's a task that, what is it? You would know this better than I. 8% roughly of people ride motorcycles worldwide. I don't know the exact. It's a small percentage, and of that, I would imagine an even smaller percentage are like enthusiasts, like that truly don't just own a motorcycle. So you're in a group of a small percentage that celebrates that activity. I think that's part of it too.
You might be onto it there. Maybe the common link is the refusal to live an ordinary life. That's that's all I can think of. But on the other hand, you've got people over in Asia who it's like their pickup truck. You see those crazy videos of the people in Vietnam climbing muddy hills that are near vertical, and they're doing it on street tires with 100 pounds of luggage and whatever else is in those bags on the back. And here I whine if I don't have the right waterproof jacket when I'm on a big ride or something like that.
You know, Mary, my fiance, she's just got her first bike, Yamaha TTR 225, and she is just beginning to scratch the surface of what that feels like. And she's buzzing up and down these roads here, and I took her out, and to watch somebody experience that is really cool because we're around riders, experienced riders. But to see somebody do it for the first time and learn the friction zone and like, I did it, and to buzz up and down the road, and I learned how to change gears, or I stood up for the first time, that takes me back. And you're like, wow, that's really cool to watch somebody else sort of get folded into that group of above the status quo just a little bit more.
I I taught my wife and my son how to ride, and it was a different experience both times. And my wife ultimately stopped riding because, as much as she enjoyed it, it was just a little too real for her. The danger and the level of focus that you need in order to stay safe and ride comfortably. She says, I like it, but I would much rather just be on the back and let you handle it and I'll enjoy the view. But I mean, she has still that skill set. My son was almost the opposite. He was a little too quick to pick it up. And it was too easy. I would just say, okay, today we're going to counter steer in this corner. And he'd go, okay. And he'd do it. And I'd go, wow, he's already got that. Okay. Well, today we're going to talk about off road riding and how to, weight the outside peg in a corner on loose ground and kick a leg out on the inside. And he said, yep. And he's like burning around these gravel roads and even faster than I'm comfortable. And I sort of got to like, whoa, I don't want to pull you out of a ditch here. So we're going to keep going gradually. But yeah, it's a wonderful time to share it with someone that intimately. And any chance I get, I love going over the basics of clutch control and, you know, lean angles and traction, talking about all that stuff. It's a mountain of knowledge. And I admit that I'm not a pro level rider, not by any stretch. I'm pretty average, I think, for an adventure rider. I've never been able to go around a track on a sport bike. It's not something I've ever, gotten around doing. I'm just more interested in exploring. But I've owned lots of sport bikes and felt the rush that they are.
It's interesting how that changes. The last sport bike I owned was a Ducati 1098S, and
Ooh.
I just remember the sensation. There's a point where the sensation of speed was just like a little overwhelming. And this is, I used to do track days. I did a little bit of club racing, but I got on the thing. That's when I had my KLR 652. So I had both bikes, and I put on my leathers and I went out to ride it. And I think in like second gear, I was like 130 or something, right? Because I just went on a back road. I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I just, and I kind of transitioned into the adventure kind of stuff. And there's an inherent risk in adventure riding, but yeah, the as riding an H2 up to like the sensation, those things go from zero to just ludicrous in a blink. And yeah, that's the sport bikes are a whole nother level, man. If you were to like put me on a track day, I don't know what I'd feel like right now. I don't know how I would ride. I surely would ride with a little more of like, I gotta be back in the office on Monday to review some gear, probably in the back of my mind. I don't know.
Yeah, I think all it takes is getting hurt once to realize how much you hate missing the riding time while you're recovering. I don't even like breaking my bike for that aspect of it. And I mean, I used to ride dirt bikes pretty aggressively in the mountains, and inevitably you break stuff when you're going hard on, the single track, and it got old, man. I got really tired of, well, I can't ride today, guys. I'm waiting for parts to come in, or
I mean, I've missed 2.5 weeks now. I should have been filming. I should have been like all the things I should have been doing, and the bike broke, waiting on it to get fixed. So I fully resonate with that. Being injured, I've ridden the least amount this year. It was 6 or 7 weeks breaking the ankle. And then I got back and I'm healthy and I started riding again, then broke the clutch. So it's just like, oh man, I don't know if you pick up the dogs barking on that, but I think I hear the garage door opening. It means Mary's home. It was a pleasure having you on the show. I mean, a real pleasure. And that's indicated by the amount of time we've been talking. I'm sure we'll continue to communicate. So I'll just leave you with the last word.
well, I have to be thankful to you for spending the time with me. I haven't ridden a lot this year either. I've had some health challenges and uh, just schedule conflicts, and I missed out on a ride in Nepal because I got sick with COVID, and I'm still dealing a little bit with the after effects. Uh, yeah, man, it's almost as good at this stage of the game for me to talk about riding like this as it is to ride. There's no time limit for me to spend talking on bikes. I will literally talk all day.
Maybe we'll have a follow-up session. I said we'll do a follow-up this winter when we're knee deep. I mean, you're in Canada, I'm in Colorado. When we're knee deep in snow, we'll talk about some of the gear we're reviewing or we're talking about, and we'll do part two. Does that sound good?
Anytime, man. Anytime that you'd like to talk shop, I'm down.
Awesome, Jim. Thank you so much, dude. It's been a super honor and a pleasure. I can't wait to edit this, get it out, and we'll do it again, man. Thanks so much for being on.
My pleasure.